This week on The Handle, explore Amarillo's iconic Santa Fe Depot. Hear a historian describe forgotten rail history. And watch a retired professor make tracks. All of this right now on Panhandle PBS as we tell the stories of the Texas Panhandle.
The construction on this started in 1910. The Santa Fe and Union Pacific merged together and started the construction on this project. In 1910s, when it developed, it was tied to the stockyards. That was a big part of the drive to get the rail head here. There was a lot of benefits to that. You see the second growth of Amarillo once this started. It was a driving force. The ability to bring commerce into here and actually ship goods out of here, from agricultural goods to livestock goods, all came into place. Even cotton was shipped out of here at one time. So that was a big part of the railroad coming here to Amarillo. So here's the freight room. These are the original scales to the depot. Both of these scales are still fully operational. If you were a passenger leaving from Amarillo, you would come in here, weigh your baggage, your old steamer carts or anything. You'd come across these sets of scales and then straight out to the train. There's another baggage room on the other side, which was for commercial freight. And then the building off to the south is also a freight building where you had the agricultural freight. You know, when we looked at this facility originally, the city manager at the time asked us to come over and do an assessment of the property to see how sound the property was. One thing that became abundantly clear to us when we first looked at the facility was this was designed by railroad engineers. This facility has railroad ties and structural steel in here that's part of the railroad in the building itself. We've got walls as much as 3.5 feet thick. I think the shallowest wall we have is a foot thick. It's solid concrete throughout. As we've toured through, I think you've noticed we've had several big trains go by. You don't feel the motion. You hear the train, but you don't feel the motion inside the building. The building is structurally a phenomenal building as far as we're concerned. When you walk out into the area before they got onto the train, originally these glassed-in areas were not here. These were just big open arches. So we had natural airflow that would come through here. So you would see benches and stuff sitting out here while you're waiting to get on the train. Here's where the conductor would be stationed in this little outbuilding here. He actually had a speaker system tied back into the ticket window and throughout the facility. All aboard would be what you would hear. We've got some great pieces here in the facility. When we bought it from Mr. Gorey was gracious enough to leave some of this stuff because he knew we would protect it, salvage it, and take care of it. We've got an original door from 1910 that was in here. It's a critical piece to our facility. We have some of the original stained glass here. We have the original telegraph, the original conductor's cap and jacket. We still have that. We have some of the original drawings to this facility, and not only this facility, but Mr. Gorey left us some artwork and some drawings for other Santa Fe facilities as well. He was really cognizant of maintaining the historical value of this property, and it shows when we tour through here. When we come out into the main lobby, of course, the ticket window, this is original. One of the neat things when you look at this is you see where your ticket windows are. You actually have toe kicks. The counters are actually made out of Bakelite. Bakelite has not been used for counter manufacturing for years. 1960s is the last time they were done. On the murals, you see the three main stops of the Santa Fe line in the Union Pacific. Originated in Chicago, that was the hub for all rail traffic, was actually out of Chicago at the time. The next stop was the Grand Canyon as far as a major stop, and then ended in the Napa Valley. And that's why you see those three represented here. And let's walk around inside and we'll show you some of the millwork that's original that you won't see just about any place else. Here's your change drawers, the dished out wood. This was the dining area, and this was kind of your upper class dining area. An exterior area and an interior area. Where we're walking into now is the grand ballroom. This ballroom would have been used for multiple functions. If you kind of go back in your memory and you think about the time and the period that this was created, you could have seen owners from XIT and the 4-6s ranches or the LS ranch riding up here to cut a deal with the Chicago broker to buy beef that goes back into the Midwest. Those kind of deals would have been cut in this area. When you walk out here, this was actually a covered porch. It wasn't enclosed at the time that it was built. As we go down into the basement, understand this is where the original secretarial pool worked. So as you see these offices and spaces down here, understand if you came to work for the railroad every day, down here's where you went to work. This is the boiler room. And so the hydronic heat for the building would have been done here. And if you look at the nameplates on these, you can see the original manufacturers from some of these boilers. They literally had to jackhammer this concrete out just to be able to get the boilers out. This tunnel actually connects to a building that the Santa Fe Depot owned on the other side of the tracks. So this tunnel actually goes all the way across the tracks. It has since been blocked off, but you can imagine the steam heat from here actually heated that building across the tracks. So if you were coming to the Harvey House and you came up the stairs here to go to the Harvey House, this would have been where you dropped off your coach, you got a ticket for your coats, and then you walked into the actual Harvey area. The Harvey's hotels were known for their fine dining. This would have been their dining area. They had their own kitchen here, but this would have been where if you came to get a meal at the Harvey House, this is where you came. There's another stairwell that comes up into here as well. Now the Harvey girls, like I said, they had to be segregated from their customers. So their dormitories are actually back here. The dormitory set for the girls, this would have been between 6 and 8 girls were in here. The same over here across the hall on these 2 end rooms.
To the absolute perfection in the way we feed the trains.
Perfection in the dining room, perfection in the dorm. We even want perfection in the Harvey uniform. Stout black shoes to keep a sense of humor. Please confine your underwear to camisole and rumor. Black shirt waist, cuffs neat and trim. The apron must be spotless from the collar to the hem.
The apron must be spotless and must have the proper swirl. That's the first requirement of a Harvey girl.
They couldn't be a temptation to their customer. Of course, you had your headmistress or 2. This would have been one of the headmistress's room. The Harvey girls had to have a separate entrance so that they didn't commingle with the passengers. Harvey houses are enormous. There's one still active that we're aware of. They're in Arizona at the Grand Canyon. But there's other ones that have gone through some historical renovations as well. Their uses vary quite a bit. Once again, keep in mind the period. Amarillo only had at the time that the railroad was built, there was maybe 15,000 people living in Amarillo at the time. And so the view from here, you saw it all. So as we go down the hallway here, these would have all been hotel rooms. Here is one of the original suites. But you can imagine a cattle baron, he can get whatever he wants. And so can that big Chicago buyer that comes down here. There's 2 suites up here of this size, and then the rest of them is pretty much normal rooms. When I look at the old construction versus the new construction, the classic workmanship and architectural work is very impressive. Downtown Amarillo is truly becoming landlocked, so the ability to develop and do things here in Amarillo, it was a critical piece for us to be able to purchase it and control. We utilize the facility a lot when we have the World Finals Rodeo, Ranch Rodeo here. You'll see livestock all out in the front parking lot here of this facility actually setting up for the rodeo. It is part of the bond project, and so the Civic Center would run it and maintain it after we actually do the remodeling of the facility.
How is it being viewed as a part, if that Civic Center bond passes, how is it being viewed as a part of the facilities?
At that point in time, if the city develops it and it becomes, we bring this thing up to spec. We'll be ADA accessible, we'll have heating and cooling in here, but we're always going to maintain the historic look and feel to the facilities.
What is it envisioned being used for?
You know, there's been a lot of conversations that there would be a smaller museum in here potentially. There could also be a restaurant in here. There's even been talk about different things being developed with the Harvey House upstairs. That could actually become a museum if the city does it. Or it could be a B&B if a private entity was to lease out the facility. There's lots of different opportunities. This structure is such a major part of the history, not only of Amarillo, but really of the United States, because of our location on Route 66 and the fact that really the railroad, Route 66 kind of followed the railroad. The railroad is the one that blazed the trail, and Route 66 followed it. A lot of the historical components of this facility are really engaging to other people throughout the country and throughout the world, quite frankly. It was such an important piece of our history. The community loves it. I know that there's a lot of people, when we've done tours throughout the facility, that they have a lot of memories of this place.
My name is Alex Hunt. I'm an English professor here at West Texas A&M University. I've been here since 2002. About 4 years ago, I founded the Center for the Study of the American West, which operates under the academic wing of the university, but we have our office here in the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum. When I first came to WT, part of my expertise was in Southwestern literature, including Hispanic literature. And so when I came to this area, I started looking for a Hispanic literature that was directly relevant to this area. And I really was hard-pressed to find that material. I began doing some research and reading into the history of this region and found that there really had been some important immigrations to this region, settlement of this region that came out of New Mexico in the 1870s, following old trade routes and old sheep herding routes, but which led to real settlement, including irrigated agriculture in this part of the Panhandle during the 1870s. And that was not a story that I had known. The way that the whole Forgotten Frontera project started was that Seesaw put on an event that was just a sort of standalone event because we knew somebody who had expertise on the labor camp at Hereford. So we put on a little event, a sort of roundtable discussion about the Hereford labor camp. And we had a really surprisingly large and enthusiastic turnout for that event. People really wanted to talk about that. They had memories of it, or they had family stories about that place. And it's really quite an interesting history. You know, that labor camp existed for quite a long time there in Hereford, and it was not the only such camp in our area. So going off of the success of that event, I got a grant from Humanities Texas to put on 3 years worth of Forgotten Frontera programs. The next one we did was had to do with issues of justice, the relationship of Hispanic people to institutions of justice in the region. And then last year we did it on the railroad history. That proved very successful because, as it turns out, a lot of Mexican-American people who live in Amarillo can date their families coming to the area to the railroad development. The old barrio neighborhoods of Amarillo, too, are built around the railroad tracks because those were rail workers. So as we were doing this preparation for the event on the railroad workers, we became aware that there's this huge stash of photographs that came out of Canadian Texas. They were taken by the man who ran the mercantile there, and there are, I guess, thousands of images, starting about 1900. And within those images, there are many of Hispanic people. Canadian was a major depot at that time. So most of these images don't have any kind of identification on them. In fact, to be exact, only one of them did we get a name that went with the image. So mostly this is what we mean by Forgotten Frontera, right? That here were these people that lived here, worked here, raised families here, but of whom there is virtually no record. Yeah. Well, the important thing I thought was in exploring these topics was not to just put on a lecture. We thought that the better format here was a community conversation, so that we hope what we come away with is an audience who's learned something new from the professors there, or the scholars there, but also that the scholars are in contact now with members of the community, and they're hearing their stories, and hopefully that's fostering some research ideas going forward. And then to augment that, we're trying to develop an oral history project where we're inviting people from the community to come in and talk to us about their memories, in this case of the railroad history. And that's been really remarkable. One woman told stories, for example, that she remembered times when the railroad workers went on strike in Amarillo. And there was lots of tension in her household because, of course, the money wasn't going to be coming in. And she remembered her mother sort of shushing them and shunting them off to another room, because their father was stressed out about the strike situation. And we also interviewed an older gentleman who worked for the railroad for decades and had amazing stories of the relationship between the railroad work and the Amarillo barrio. So I think this is really important to our future as a region. As I understand it, to the degree that we are growing as a population in this area, the growth is Hispanic population. And while you can't draw a direct line from New Mexican people that came in the 1870s and Mexican immigrants that came in the 1920s to work on the railroad, and other Hispanic groups that came to work in slaughterhouses and packing houses, I think it's important that we as a region recognize that we have long had Hispanic population, and that's an important part of who we are historically and going forward.
I've done model railroading for many, many years. I can't even think of how many years, on and off, of course. And this layout is only the third one I've done in my lifetime, so this will never be finished, but it's a work in progress. It's a lifetime hobby. You don't build one overnight. I'm Martin Birkenfeld, and I'm the senior. There's 4 of us. My great-grandchild is Martin the 4th. Oh, back when I was a kid, trains were the thing. I mean, everybody traveled by train. In fact, in Amarillo, we had 3 railroads. We had the Burlington Railroad, or what they used to call the Fort Worth and Denver, because that's the only place that traveled. And we had the Rock Island, which went west and east, and the Santa Fe, all 3 railroads, and they all had passenger trains, and it was a constant thing. And trains were everything. I mean, everybody was fascinated with trains. That was the thing. Model railroading has actually been done ever since the late 1800s. When they first came up with electricity, that was one of the first things they did. They started making motors that would run little trains. It goes way back. But about the 20s it took off, and it's just advanced. Now all of what I have here is computer operated. In the old days it was regular old transformers and rheostats, and that was it. But the computer, there's 3 computers involved. There's this little box over there, that's what we call a command center, and it controls the engines. Each engine has its own little computer, and then this device here sends a message to the engine to get it going. Each engine has an address, and with this system you can run, it's exactly like a regular railroad. You can run one train one direction, another train the other direction on the same track without ever, you gotta watch your collisions. But you can't do that with the old type. It was all DC, and you had, one polarity, and that's it. What this does, the computer sends a message to that box, and that box tells the local what to do. Well, yeah, this is HO, and O scale is the old lino that they used to have with the three rail track years ago. Well, they still have it actually. That's O gauge. And this is HO, which means half of O gauge. That's where it gets its thin. This is half the size across the track of O gauge. And they also have N gauge, which is somewhat smaller than that. It's not exactly half, but it's pretty small.
For people who aren't aware of what a switch does on a rail, why don't you go ahead and...
Well, it changes the direction of where the train's going to go. For example, if it's in this position, the train will go off on that track. And if you slide this over, it goes off on this track. It determines which direction the train will actually go. And of course, they have switches on the big trains, and they're remotely operated. These are all hand operated. I've got a total of 28 switches on this railroad, 28. When a car derails, I say, oh man, good, I'll put that in here and see what's wrong with the wheels or whatever. Sometimes they derail, they'll just accumulate dirt on the wheel, and it will derail just from that dirt on the wheel. So you clean the wheel and it's fine. And sometimes it's the swivel of the truck. Sometimes it gets where it doesn't swivel right, you have to adjust the screw on it. No, for example, you have a little screw that you have the swivel part. It has to be adjusted to where it'll swivel right. If it doesn't swivel just right, it will definitely derail, especially on the switch. Sometimes on actual track. Or you have a little piece of rock that gets up in, gets on the rail or up where the flangeway goes. And the problem with these newer engines and cars, they have a to scale flange, which on a real car, it's only 1.5 inches. That flange is not very tall. So you have to have perfect running track or you get derailed, that's it. You have to have everything running just right. All the kids that come see it, they want it to go fast. And I told them, trains don't go fast. I mean, in scale situation, this is probably about 20, somewhere around there. And it can be measured. I've got this measured out. The complete circle around here is less than a mile, scale mile. So it has to go around once and then almost halfway for a mile. So you can time it and actually come up with a mile, how fast it's going.
But these setups are not cheap.
Oh no, not anymore. Now they used to be. For example, back when I bought, well, this is one of my oldest type. This caboose here was like $2 in a kit. And now that same caboose is probably about $40. It's like everything else, it's gone out of sight price-wise. But I've got things here. Used to be a locomotive. You could buy one for about $15, the highest it would cost you. Nowadays, you're looking at $400. They're not cheap. This particular steam engine was $300.
So it's kind of a hard hobby to get into these days.
Well, it really is nowadays. If I didn't have everything so much I have already, most of these cars and all, some of the locals even, I had years ago, I converted them over to the DCC, so that means direct command communication. That's what it's supposed to mean. So, actually, what makes me the happiest, I enjoy solving problems. And of course, I used to teach and all, so I'm really into solving problems.
Hi, I'm Nolan Hill. I've lived all over the country, and a few months ago, I pulled up stakes and moved here. And now I'm showing you the Texas Panhandle with fresh eyes. Welcome to The View from the Hill. After being closed for over 40 years, the Mulkey Theatre in downtown Clarendon has finally reopened its doors. With the popularity of modern multiplexes, theaters like this one are deteriorating and being torn down. But over the last 11 years, more than $1 million was invested to restore the Mulkey to its former glory and bring this classic cinema back to life.
The actual site was originally a theater before this that burned down, and in 1946 they reopened it as the Mulkey, and it was opened by the Mulkey family. That's where the name came from. And at that point it gave them 2 theaters in town, so Clarendon was a big town with 2 theaters, and it was open until the mid-'80s. And at that point, TV had taken over and the theater closed. So it sat here for quite a few years. Different people owned it, and we're going to do things with it. And finally, back about 10 years ago, the roof was getting in such bad shape that the Clarendon Economic Development Corporation stepped in and bought the building. And then over the years, put together a plan to revitalize it and started working on some of the miscellaneous steps. It had fallen into really bad disrepair, and people would break into it and things like that. Literally, pieces were falling off of it. The old letters up on top of the marquee were in really bad shape, and parts of the sign itself where the letters now go to show what the movies are going to be, the backlit lighting, parts of that were starting to fall out, and of course the paint job was horrible and things like that. It looked really, really bad, and so being able to come back in and redo it has really made the town look a lot better. We got the neon all redone. That was one of the first things that was done a few years ago, was to get all the neon redone and get the outside refinished so it would look really good. It's amazing, if you sit down here at night, the lights come on automatically, and if you sit down here at night, you'll see people off the highway driving through will actually stop and come down and take pictures, selfies with it and things like that. People will stop. And we're in the process right now of getting a couple more signs redone that were neon to kind of help for the whole look of the town. So it'll make it look a lot better. And you know, numerous people that lived here, grew up here, come back for events like the Chuck Wagon Cook-Off or home football games. They're all really amazed at how good it looks. And of course, people that have come into the theater that remember coming here as kids, etc., are amazed that it looks as good as it did after all those years. A lot of the people with the town felt that this was a really good project to spend some money on to make the town look a lot better. By the time you start putting in audio-visual systems, redoing air conditioning, repainting it, buying seats, redoing the outside, all those things, it's an expensive world to be able to get a lot of that redone. Of course, all the old wiring and plumbing in it was from the 1940s, so it needed to be redone. So that was the biggest thing, was finding the money and being able to get everybody on board to do it. By doing it as a sort of a city project, then it has come back, and we'll be able to do shows and things like that, be able to do live performances. We can do presentations that if people want to do, we can do one-act plays, a lot of things like that that we're able to do at the theater now that you couldn't do back when it was just a movie house. We've had what we call our Mulkey Block Party for 6 years to help raise funds to get the theater up and going, and some miscellaneous grants and things like that, and money's come along. And finally here about a year ago, finally got all the money put together to get the thing open. And it was reopened on the 25th of May of this year. Clarendon has managed to do a really good job of staying relevant and also starting to redo a lot of their downtown things and work on things along 287 to keep the town looking good and vibrant.